In the early morning hours of November 16th, after years of construction and months of testing, NASA's SLS rocket finally got the chance to tear through the night sky at 1:47 a.m. After years of construction and months of testing, as the most powerful flying machine ever to leave the planet, the SLS rocket burned brighter than any other rocket that's ever existed before. It was a spectacular fireworks show, but that was just the beginning of NASA's most important spaceflight mission of all time. Artemis 1 has been a historic flight for many decades, and now that the SLS has proved itself capable of flight, all eyes are on Orion as it sets out on a 25-day mission into deep space. This is a very busy few weeks for Artemis 1 and its crew of mannequins, microbes, and measuring devices. The crew have a busy few weeks ahead of them, so here are a few things you need to be aware of. Since this is the space race, the first thing that everyone will remember about Artemis 1 will be that we were witnessing a textbook NASA launch on November 16th, despite a famous stretch of false starts that preceded the dramatic launch of this massive rocket ship. Everything went off smoothly and everything went off without a hitch. Unfortunately, the perfect launch window just so happened to open at 1 a.m. Eastern Time. But if that's what it took for them to get the SLS off the ground, well, so be it. Of course, rocket launches are exciting and look really cool, but those two side boosters on the SLS are especially impressive. We saw Artemis ride up into the heavens on a massive column of fire and smoke in a way that was unlike anything we have ever seen before. It was the brightest rocket launch ever to date, lighting up the Florida coast as well as turning night into day. These solid rocket boosters took the title of the most powerful rocket motors ever launched. The original design from the Space Shuttle was repurposed for SLS with a 20% increase in power. These side boosters are so bright and so powerful. There was an epic moment where the side boosters broke off from the core stage and still pulled these massive trail of sparks as the 4RS-25 hydrogen engines burnt away in the sky as they started to fall back to Earth. You could see the 4RS-25 hydrogen engines barely burning away at all as they eventually splashed down in the ocean. The hydrogen burning core stage of the SLS continued on its way to space, giving the Orion spacecraft the velocity it needed to make it there. As soon as the core separated from the rocket, it was then that the iconic booster also fell back to Earth for a splashdown, followed by the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. As I mentioned earlier, this is basically just one more rocket engine, which is an AL-10 that burns the same liquid hydrogen fuel as the core booster. This stage of the rocket will have to first raise the Orion spacecraft up to a low Earth orbit so that it will not fall back to Earth as the core stage does. The ICP then made the final push 20 minutes later so that Orion could be sent into an injection orbit through trans-lunar channels. Once that was done, we saw the final stage separation, the ICP being released from the Orion, which in actuality served a dual purpose now that it had completed its job of launching Orion to the Moon. Currently, the ICP is full of CubeSats, tiny satellites that are going to deploy as it floats around in the CIS lunar space. In fact, the NEA Scout is actually on its way to study a space in the future. After deploying a solar sail weighing more than 925 square feet, a near-Earth asteroid called Lunar Ice Cube will use an infrared spectrometer to search for water in all forms during a 7-hour orbit around the Moon. The CUSP satellite will continue to orbit the Sun for a period of time after being released in order to observe the radiation from the Sun, solar winds, and other solar events. So that is where we stand right now. As of now, the largest and heaviest spacecraft in Apollo is traveling to the Moon at a speed that is. The service module has its own rocket engine that will be performing a few more burns to set the final course around the Moon, and then back home again once the final course around the Moon has been set. The velocity will be approximately 5,500 miles per hour or 800 kilometers per hour. Here is a look at the next few milestones for Artemis 1 that we are looking forward to. Monday, November 21st T+6 days from launch. Orion will conduct its lowest flyby of the Moon, coming just 60 miles or 100 kilometers from its surface. So be on the lookout for that. This flyby maneuver is going to use the Moon's gravity to slingshot Orion out into deep space, and so be on the lookout for that. On day 10, November 25th, the service module will perform another rocket engine burn, which will place the spacecraft in a distant retrograde orbit that will take it 380 miles, or 610 kilometers above the lunar surface on day 13. During the year, Orion will break the record set by Apollo 13, reaching the greatest distance from the Moon. It would be very difficult for an astronaut to travel to the surface of the Earth for a crew-rated spaceship that will be more than 300 miles away from the surface. Apollo 13 didn't travel that far out on purpose, as they were attempting to slingshot their dying spacecraft around the Moon so that they could return home before they all suffocated. So that is where things get really interesting for the crew of Artemis 1. There are no people on board, but that doesn't mean there aren't. In the Orion capsule, there is a very important crew. The commander's chair is occupied by a very important person, and he is Munichen Campos. He was named after Arturo Campos, an electrical engineer who was a key player in bringing the Apollo 13 mission back to Earth safely. While I do not think he was in the Tom Hanks movie, Artemis is finally giving him recognition. It has sensors built into the mannequin's body to detect radiation, as well as sensors in its seat to record the activity. It is important that we keep in mind that Artemis 1 is primarily focused on testing this flight system in its future as a crew capsule. Our man Campos will be accompanied by two phantom mannequins. Helga and Zohar are two phantom mannequins. They have no limbs or spacesuits, just a couple of torso busts containing more than 60 passive sensors and 34 active dosimeters each. The sensors are used to measure radiation, so Helga and Zohar have been constructed as part of the torsos, which are made from materials that mimic human bone and muscle tissue. They include specific components that are specific to female anatomy in order to mimic the ovaries and breasts that are more susceptible to radiation. It is expected that the AstroRad, a specialized radiation vest that is being tested, will provide effective radiation protection for the astronauts' vital organs in the event that the capsule were to be hit by radiation. A radiation event in deep space, so only Zohar will wear the AstroRad vest, and Helga will serve as a control once the mannequins are back on Earth. Researchers will compare radiation exposures between the two. When the mannequins are back on Earth, researchers will compare radiation exposures between the pair, and the mannequins are not the only crew members of Artemis 1. It is actually a piece of life on board the capsule. Scientists threw in 12 bags of baker's yeast into the Artemis 1 payload so that the microorganism would act as a substitute for the microorganisms that normally take care of. An interesting experiment that is being carried out is the moon trees. 1,000 tree seeds are on board Artemis 1, and they will give us an idea of how radiation levels in deep space will affect living cells. The seeds are being provided by the USDA Forest Service, and they consist of 5 different species of tree seeds. They include the loblolly pine, the American sycamore, the sweet gum, the giant sequoias, and the Douglas fir. It is hoped that the seeds will fly around the moon and then be planted. A few decades ago, when Apollo 14 was in the air, seeds were flown to Earth in order to accomplish this. But they won't grow into mutant alien trees or anything like that. They will still serve as a living reminder of what humans are capable of when we work together. Speaking of sentimental items, Artemis 1 will also carry some souvenirs from previous lunar missions along with it. A number of small items from the National Air and Space Museum's collection will be included in the official flight kit. The bolt from the F-1 rocket engine of Apollo 11 was recovered from the ocean floor about a decade ago from an area of the ocean floor. There is also an Apollo 8 commemorative coin made with some of the metal from the Apollo 8 mission, as well as a commercial mission patch from the Apollo 17 mission purchased at Kennedy Space Center in the 1970s. As well as taking Snoopy along for the ride, NASA's human spaceflight program has long been a de facto mascot of Charlie Brown's sidekick for years. The lunar module of Apollo 10 was dubbed Snoopy back in 1969. A Silver Snoopy Award is given to individuals whose work has been exceptional for the success of a mission, as well as for the safety of human flight. There is currently a plush Snoopy inside the Artemis 1 that floats around at the moment with his own orange spacesuit. He is used scientifically as a zero-G indicator when the capsule reached orbit after making its dip into interstellar space on the 16th of December. First Orion's engine started. Orion will fire up once again on day 20 for a departure burn that will place it on course for a second moon flyby, and then there will be one final push to set Orion on its way back to Earth on December 11th. Orion is expected to return home on December 11th after barreling into the atmosphere at the speed of 25 miles per hour or 40 kilometers per hour. This will be the fastest re-entry speed that anyone has ever attempted, so it will be a huge test for the capsule and its capability. As soon as the Orion heat shield withstands temperatures of up to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 2,750 degrees Celsius, Orion will then splash down in the Pacific Ocean under parachutes, bringing an end to the Artemis 1 mission. But in reality, Artemis 1 is just the beginning of a new era of human spaceflight. Based on what scientists worldwide have learned from this test flight, the process can begin to get ready for Artemis 2 by analyzing the first crude data. A similar flight plan will be followed for the flight of the SLS and Orion spacecraft Artemis 2. But in this case, the objective will be to bring humans into lunar space for the first time since 1972. Artemis 2 will be an 8-day mission that provides the final data required for us to confirm that Artemis is capable of sending people to the surface of the moon. It has yet to be announced who will be on board Artemis 2, but we know that 3 of the astronauts will be from NASA, while 1 will be from another country. I think it is a pretty good deal, if you ask me, that we traded another robotic arm with the Canadian space program for the Lunar Gateway station in exchange for a ride to the moon. The launch date for Artemis 2 is tentatively set for 2024, provided that all data from Artemis 1 indicates that it is ready to fly. In the meantime, we can expect to receive a lot of attention as we follow Artemis 1 on its journey for a few months to come, but we won't know that answer for a while. That's all for today's video, guys. How many of you have gotten the chance to visit and see the NASA's Artemis 1 moon rocket? Tell us about your experience in the comment section below. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. See you in the next video. Until then, cheers.